Welcome back. I'm Got Late. We're starting from the top. Boy Missing, Chapter 1. Did you see a stranger? Morning, June 4th, 2010. There were people who swore they'd seen the boy. Just a moment. What they didn't know was when they had last seen him. The 2-story rural school was crowded that morning with more than 400 extra people, parents, grandparents, and siblings of students whose science exhibits were on display. The 7 doors in and out of the school were unlocked. No one wore name tags. A detective asked later if there had been anyone strange hanging around. 7-year-old Kyron Horman arrived at school Friday, June 4th, 2010, with his stepmother and his 19-month-old half-sister. They were in his father's white 2005 Ford F-250 4-door extended cab truck. There were 2 child seats in the back seat. As a rule, Terry Moulton never drove the truck, preferring her candy apple red Ford Mustang GT. The vanity license plate read RDSQRL in recognition of her red hair. Kyron might have wondered why they were in the truck. It wasn't to take his science project home. His diorama on the red-eyed tree frog and all the other projects created by the 300 students would stay at Skyline Elementary through the next week. Terry delivered Kyron and his science exhibit the day before, June 3rd, when the students had presented their projects to each other. Friday was for family. In addition to illustrating the frog's life cycle, the project explained that the rainforest amphibian had developed its huge scarlet peepers to shock predators. If a bird or snake got too close and hesitated a moment before striking, the tree frog flashed its bulging eyes, webbed orange feet, and neon green body, giving it a precious second to jump to safety. But the tree frog's safety depended on the predator hesitating. Kyron didn't know it, but it's not just strangers who are predators. It was the next to last week of school for the year, and in addition to the excitement and the distraction of the science fair, there was an air of finality, that wonderful anticipation of school letting out for the summer in a few days. Kyron planned to spend as much time as possible with his mother, Desiree Young, in Medford, several hours south of Portland. He was excited to go on his stepfather's boat and to fish and camp and to see his best friend, his cousin Mason. Kyron was wearing his CSI t-shirt. He loved learning about forensics and police procedures. He wanted to be a detective like his stepfather, Tony Young. And he'd had a big thrill in the fall of 2009. A forensics exhibit was touring the country, and it stopped in the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry in Portland. On a school trip, Kyron had bought the shirt from the gift store. It was black with the letter CSI for Crime Scene Investigation and illustrated the images of handcuffs, a gun, and the x-ray of a hand. Kyron was seen in his classroom, room 213, at the southwest corner of the main floor of the school. Christina Porter, or Miss Porter, as the children called her, was the teacher of his combined 2nd and 3rd grade class. Kyron's stepmother took a photograph of him standing in front of his science project. He was seen by his friends Carson, Tanner, Curtis, and Ellie, who were also in Miss Porter's class. Terry also took a photo of Ellie with her turtle exhibit. Ellie's mother, Alice Jacobson, saw Kyron in Miss Porter's room. He was seen downstairs visiting the classroom of Scott Macbeth, his kindergarten and first grade teacher. Then he and his stepmother went back upstairs using different staircases. Chiron's friend Tanner passed him on the stairs at the front entrance. Terry said she stood at the top of the stairs at the east end of the hallway by the gym and waved at Chiron as he entered his classroom. Then the shy boy with his toothy smile, crew cut, and glasses vanished. Chapter 2, What the Hell is Going On? Afternoon, June 4th, 2010. It was the city in the sky. It was the city in the sky. Something was lighting up a huge swath of the night above the hills and narrow roads that made up the eastern slope of the Tualatin Mountains, 16 miles northwest of Portland, Oregon. Despite the lit sky, a person, a child, could get lost in the maze of roads beneath. One looks like another. On one side of each road is a steep hillside. On the other side, a deep ravine. The narrow 2-lane network of roads traverses several thousand acres of old growth and second growth forest called Forest Park. Or the adult or child could get lost in the area named Sauvie Island. 26,000 acres of marsh, farms, wildlife areas, and river outlets where the Willamette River and the Columbia River meet and flow 100 miles to the Pacific Ocean. There's a story, maybe an urban myth, maybe not, that a fisherman fell out of his boat and was swept out to the Pacific and never seen again. 38-year-old Desiree Young gripped the steering wheel of her orange 2006 Saturn Ion for more than 4 hours on the trip north from Medford, averaging the speed of 90 miles per hour and keeping an eye out for state police. She wasn't one to talk aimlessly, so her husband Tony, 5 years older, a detective in Medford, Oregon, police department, and a little tipsy, exchanged only the essential bits of information. She was driving because she had insisted. If she was less frantic driving than not driving, Tony thought, well, maybe it would be okay for her to be behind the wheel. Plus, he'd had a few drinks at the police department's off-duty get-together, where the menu was beer, barbecue, and horseshoes. For Desiree, it was a third marriage. It was Tony's second. He'd been married to his high school sweetheart for 17 years. Tony and Desiree met when she worked at a bank in Medford, and he was a local detective assigned to investigate financial crimes. They worked together professionally for more than a year before their first date. They shared a good laugh when they discovered each had done a criminal background check on the other. Desiree followed Northwest Cornelius Pass Road north. Every once in a while, she could see the lights of a home or farm, but the farther she drove, the more deserted the area became. The dread she felt since receiving a phone call from Skyline Elementary School telling her that her second-grade son was missing had grown. Tony knew that the first few hours of a missing person case are crucial. But everyone knew that, thanks to television shows, reality and otherwise. Desiree and Tony were mesmerized by the lights. The sun had set. What was the source for the lights in the sky? In another time and place, it might be a movie premiere or a grand opening of a grocery store in a small town. Not this time. It was Desiree's turn to have her sons, 15-year-old Quinn McCullough and 7.5-year-old Chiron Horman. Every other Friday, Desiree drove the 169 miles from Medford north to Springfield. Often the boys were driven down from Portland by Desiree's ex, Chiron's father, Kane Horman, who handed them off at Sherry's Cafe and Pies at the Gateway and Belt Line exit off I-9 just east of Eugene. It made for a lot of driving every other weekend, but it was better than the years she had driven all the way to and from Portland every other Friday and Sunday, picking up the boys from their respective fathers and stepmothers. Both boys also lived with their younger half-sisters. For Desiree, it was one of those you do what you gotta do tasks you perform if you love your child and want to be a good parent. She talked to Chiron on the phone and the evening before about the plans for the weekend. Maybe she, Quinn, and Chiron would take time to have some of Sherry's famous desserts. Just like his mom, Chiron liked the chocolate peanut butter pie best. At 4:24 p.m., Desiree was about to head out to pick up her sons. She was sitting at her desk in Lithia Motors in Medford, where she was the payroll manager. The company had grown from one Chrysler Plymouth Dodge dealership in 1946 to 350 stores in Oregon and across the country. Desiree was talking with her director, Carla Hegler, when Desiree's cell phone rang. The phone screen indicated that the call was coming from Chiron's school. "Hang on," Desiree said to Carla. "It's Chiron's school. I better get it." "Is this Desiree Young?" a woman's voice asked. Once Desiree confirmed it, the caller identified herself as the secretary at Skyline Elementary School. "You are listed as the emergency contact for Chiron Horman." "Well, that's because I'm his mother, Desiree." Desiree had been trying to explain that for years, and that she was Chiron's mother, not Terry Horman, Terry Moulton, the stepmother he lived with part of the time, who had never really warmed up to him. "I have to inform you that Chiron is missing." Desiree gasps. "What? Have you seen Chiron?" the secretary asked. "Have you seen him, or do you know where he is?" "What? No, how is this possible? Wasn't Terry with him?" "His stepmother is here." "You need to call the police," Desiree said. "They are here and are directing me to make this call." There wasn't much more to the conversation. Desiree hung up quickly and immediately stepped outside to call Terry. "What the hell's going on?" she asked Terry. Terry and Desiree had a long, complicated history going back to when Kane began seeing Terry. Terry and Desiree were not friends, never had been, never would be. Later, when Terry's friends claimed that the two women were friends and that Terry had raised Chiron at Desiree's request and that Terry had only begun dating Kane after his divorce from Desiree, Desiree set the record straight. Kane Horman, had begun seeing Terry in April 2002. Not only were Kane and Desiree still married, but Desiree was pregnant with Chiron. Terry's answer to what the hell was going on was a recitation, recitation of the few minutes she'd spent at school with Chiron that morning. Terry had dropped Chiron off. She and her 19-month-old daughter, Kira, accompanied Chiron into the school. He hung up his jacket and backpack in his classroom, and they looked at his science exhibit on the red-eyed tree frog. She took a photo. She had posted it on Facebook. Hadn't Desiree seen it? Terry and Chiron wandered the hallway and ran the length of the school. They went downstairs to see the science exhibits prepared by students in the other classrooms. When headed back upstairs, Terry said she stood at the top of the stairs and watched Chiron go into his classroom. At 3:15 p.m., she and Kane and Kira went to meet the school bus. Chiron wasn't on it. They hurried to school. In addition to the school-wide science fair, the school-wide science fair that had brought hundreds of people to the school, there was an afternoon talent show. Chiron was not slated to be part of it, so his absence still didn't get anyone's attention. Like his mother, Chiron was shy. He struggled to make it through a presentation about Portland's Iron Bridge, and he'd given to his class in April. He was anxious anytime there was a school concert or event that required him to speak or perform, even if it meant being just one of many in a class choir. In videos of school concerts and his talk about the bridge, Chiron looks happy but ill at ease. Desiree was immediately suspicious and began to question Terry Moulton. Her story didn't ring true. Desiree played it back into her head as they continued to talk. She dissected everything Terry had said. Terry hadn't dropped Chiron off. She had gone into the school with them. Terry said that she waved goodbye to Chiron. Desiree challenged Terry. "You can't see Chiron's room from the top of that stairwell," she said. Terry was vague. Not because she was emotional or crying or upset. She wasn't. Her story just didn't make sense. Desiree immediately thought, "My God, she's lying to me." "I'm coming. I'll be there in 4.5 hours, Desiree said. "Oh, you're coming? Here?" Terry sounded surprised that Desiree was taking the disappearance seriously and planned to drive all the way up. "Of course I'm coming," Desiree said as she hung up. She went back inside. A group of employees clustered around her desk. They had heard some of the call. Desiree was crying, but managed to say she had to leave right that minute. She had to get to Portland. Her boss said, "Hold on." They had to get Desiree in her car home to get her packed and on the road. The first thing she had to do, Carla told her, was find Tony. Desiree knew he was at a police gathering. Tony had warned her that the location was so rural that there was no cell phone service. Desiree called the police department dispatcher and explained that she had to reach her husband. The dispatcher kept her on the line while they called the home of retired Sergeant Chad Teresi. The line was busy. His wife Trish was on the phone talking to her sister, but the dispatcher broke in saying that there was an emergency. Desiree could hear Trish question whether they really needed to interrupt her phone call. She was told yes. Trish stepped away and yelled out the door for Tony. When he reached the phone, Desiree could tell he was a bit intoxicated. "The school called. Chiron is missing," Desiree told him. "I'm driving up to Portland. Do you need me to go with you?" Tony asked. Desiree hadn't thought that far ahead. She just knew she had to get to Portland. "Yes," she said. Between 4:24 and 5:08, when Desiree and Tony left for Portland, she had talked to the school secretary, talked to Terry, located Tony, been driven home, taken the dog, Ernie Burt, their 9-year-old 110-pound yellow lab, to the neighbors, handed over picnic items to her garage to a coworker who would make sure that it got to the company party the next day, talked to her sister Kelly Ramirez, and packed a suitcase. She also called Kane, who was at Chiron's school. Desiree and Kane had been divorced for a lot longer than they had been married. They had traversed the uneasy communications necessary for co-parenting as exes. He reacted to her phone call as she expected he would. Unemotionally. "You know what I know," he told her. "The police are here. I'm sure we're going to find them." The detective from the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office and Portland Police Bureau had arrived at the school and Kane's house at 4:33 p.m., where they were searching both. Neither Kane nor Terry had phoned Desiree to tell Chiron to say that Chiron was missing. Desiree would have trouble forgiving that slight. Tony's friend Terry Newell, who had retired as a Medford detective the year before, but still worked investigations and missing persons cases for the department, drove Tony home from the barbecue. He repeatedly offered to drive Tony and Desiree to Portland, but they said no. She drove. At first, she was mad at Tony and had been drinking and couldn't drive. Tony and Desiree didn't talk much in the car. Tony, a detective for 20 years, found himself slightly saying a few words over and over to himself during the trip. 70 feet, 70 feet. 70 feet was the distance from Bill Simmons' trailer to the patch of field in southern Oregon where Kayleen Glazer's body was found in 2008. The 15-year-old had disappeared in 1996. Terry Newell and Tony had worked the case for years. It was a no-body investigation, a case that dragged on with the prosecution postponed until the missing persons or their remains are found. 70 feet became kind of a mantra for Tony and Terry, representing how close someone can be, almost under your nose, and yet be hidden. It is also reminding them that the missing persons case areas must be searched multiple times and then searched again. A missing person is the single most stressful case there is for a detective. TV true crimes shows focus on how crucial the first 24 or 48 hours are. But it's the first 3 or 4 hours after a child has been abducted when the victimization and murder happen. Tony didn't share that with Desiree. That afternoon, before Terry and Kane walked to meet the school bus, Terry was busy posting on Facebook and sending emails to Desiree. At 1:21 p.m., Terry posted the photo she had taken of Chiron that morning at his school science fair. Chiron, with his blonde crew cut, blue eyes and glasses, and wearing his black CSI t-shirt, stood proudly by the exhibit he had worked so hard on. When Terry sent Desiree an email letting her know she had posted a picture of Chiron, soon after she sent more emails to Desiree, telling her about a school t-shirt order and confirming summer plans. Desiree always tried to minimize their communication. They had developed a system that kept an important boundary, or at least Desiree thought so. They exchanged photos on a flash drive that Terry would put in Chiron's backpack. When it arrived in Medford, Desiree downloaded the newest photos. Occasionally, Terry would contact her before or after a visit, but Terry was unusually busy the afternoon of June 4th. During the drive, Desiree told Tony she thought Terry might be responsible. If she did something to Chiron, she told him, "You'll have to hold me back because I'll kill her." Tony listened, but withheld judgment. "I don't go off of feelings," he says to himself. Tony tried desperately to get an update on his phone. There was nothing. Just north of Eugene, Terry called Desiree again. She said that she and Kane were back home now. So far, the search for Chiron had been unsuccessful. "I was sure she was calling to tell me that Chiron had been found," Desiree said. But Terry talked about bringing Chiron's backpack and coat home from school. She kept mentioning that she was worried about Chiron because he didn't have his jacket. Why would Terry go on about that? Desiree wondered. Did Terry want her to worry about Chiron being outside in the cold and the dark? Terry also said something about a janitor at the school whom she found suspicious and wanted the police to check out. From the car, Desiree phoned her sister Kelly Ramirez and her parents Kathy and Richard Davidson. She also called Quinn's father, her first husband, Gary Munson. On a good day, communication between Desiree and Gary, his wife Lisa, who was close to Terry, was difficult. Their relationship was about to become more strained. Either Kane or Terry had phoned Gary and Lisa to let them know that Chiron was missing. Desiree called Gary to say she was on her way to Portland. It was her weekend to have her sons. When Desiree got out of the car at the Munson home in Beaverton, there were no hugs and no expressions of concern about her missing son. There was no mention from Gary or Lisa that a close family member of a child. There was no mention from Gary or Lisa that a close member of the family, a child, was missing. A child who was a half-brother to Gary's son with Desiree, Quinn. Without a word about Chiron, Gary let it be known that he was determined to keep Quinn from going with his mother. Known as a stick-to-the-schedule guy, Gary had prevented Quinn from attending Desiree and Tony's wedding the summer before because it wasn't her weekend to have her sons. If Quinn wasn't going to the wedding, Kane decided Chiron wouldn't either. Now, Gary said he did not want Chiron exposed to whatever was going on. Desiree reminded him that this was her weekend and said, "If I need to bring the sheriff, I will. I already have one son missing. You're not going to keep me from seeing my son. I need to hold my child." Quinn spoke up and said he wanted to go with Desiree. His father backed down. As Desiree got back on 185th Avenue and headed north, she looked in the rearview mirror and made eye contact with Quinn in the back seat. "Did you hear what's going on?" she said. He had. "I don't understand how he can be gone," Quinn said. "I don't either," Desiree said. She told him about Terry taking him to the science fair and leaving him at school. The road dipped and climbed. Suddenly, the night sky changed from pitch black to bright. Whatever was lighting up the sky, there was an urgency to it. The lights in the sky shouted, "Something important is happening here. Come see." Desiree prepared to turn into Northwest Skyline Boulevard toward the school. "No," Tony said. "We need to go to the house first." Desiree's heart was pulling her to the school, not to Kane and Terry's house, but she continued up Northwest Cornelius Pass Road. As they looked to the east, they could see the source of the lights. The school's parking lot had become a command center for law enforcement. Huge RVs filled the parking area. Other vehicles were parked across the road at the historic Brooks Hill Church and the nearby fire station. The lights in the sky were created by generators, headlights, stadium lights, searchlights, and helicopters shining lights on nearby woods. Inside the 2-story brick school, every light blazed. Media satellite trucks and their dishes pointed at the sky, hogged what little room there was on the side of Skyline Boulevard. Other vehicles clogged Northwest Cornelius Pass Road up and beyond the turnoff to Kane's on Northwest Sheltered Nook Road. Desiree and Tony held their breath for a moment. This was happening. Chiron was really missing. "Okay, we've got a ton of people on this," Tony thought. "It got real for the first time," he said later. It was not a good sign that it was dark and Chiron had not been found. There was media vans and cameras at the entrance and turnoffs to Kane's, but no police guarding the driveway. "Don't stop, just drive through," Tony told Desiree. She drove up the hill to the house and parked next to Kane's white truck. She looked at her dashboard clock. It was 9:38 p.m. Desiree got out of her car and instinctively began to walk over to join a throng of people. Trained dogs and their handlers were with groups of searchers in bright orange vests. Some wore headlamps. All were calling Chiron's name. A helicopter flew low overhead. Tony watched as Desiree began following him. He waited for a moment, then said her name. She stopped and turned to look at him. "Desi, honey," he said softly as he reached out and took her hand. "We have to go inside." Chapter 3, No More Secrets, evening, June 4th, 2010. Terry greeted them at the door. "Hello! "How are you?" she gushed. "Do you want anything? I made coffee. We have tons of food and people brought. It's all in the kitchen and in the dining room." Huh? Terry's cheery welcome was weird, inappropriate. What about a few words of sympathy before offering tuna casserole and coffee cake? Terry showed no signs of anguish that Desiree or Tony could see. In fact, she seemed upbeat. She was busy coming and going from one end of the house to the other, washing Chiron's dirty laundry and his backpack and jacket. Either the police didn't notice, or they didn't care. They had presumably looked at the items when they had been retrieved from his classroom. Desiree and Tony weren't interested in having a beverage or food. They were worried sick. Since talking to Terry on the phone on the ride up, Desiree had felt an uneasy dread in her gut. Everything was wrong with this. Oh my God, what did she do? Desiree wondered to herself. Tony withheld judgment. It was what he'd been trained to do. Terry was not visibly upset. She was calm. It made the hair stand up on the back of Desiree's neck. Kane wasn't known for showing his emotions, but Desiree hugged him as she entered the home. It was clear he was in shock. His eyes were red. Desiree was a basket case. She was crying. Quinn was crying. Tony was crying. Kane had cried. Not Terry. She was not a bit upset, Tony said. She's playing the hostess. It was like she was having guests over for dinner. There were a sea of faces. Desiree and Tony were overwhelmed at the number of people inside and outside of the house. Tony could hear the police on the scene sorting out their roles. The two major crime scenes were Kane's house and Skyline Elementary. Both were in unincorporated Multnomah County, outside of the city of Portland. More law enforcement would arrive the next day, including searchers and vehicles on loan from counties all over the state. Tony's department in Jackson County would send vehicles and people. He knew he would need to keep his distance and that law enforcement would not and should not confide in him. Having a family member too close to the investigation could compromise it. He had already seen a cop he knew outside of the house. Tony and Mark Matsushima had met at the police academy in 1989. Mark let Tony know that he couldn't be a source of information. As time passed, they spoke and sometimes shared information. Tony's job was to support Desiree, but he wasn't an experienced observer. He could dim the switch a bit, but he couldn't turn it off. After Desiree and Tony declined food, Terry handed Desiree a copy of the photo she had taken at the science fair. The FBI printed it on paper. Within a couple of hours, it would be the flyer announcing Chiron was missing. Desiree felt a chill when she saw he had worn his CSI t-shirt. Terry seemed to know what Desiree was thinking. "He just had to wear that shirt today," Terry said. It's kind of interesting that he picked that shirt, right? Here, you can have it. She thrust the photo at Desiree. "It's for you." Desiree studied the photo as she walked away. She worried that the moment the camera had captured had been Chiron's very last. She prayed that she could magically remove Chiron from the photo and make him safe. If she couldn't extract him, she wished she could inject herself into it. To see what he was thinking and feeling at that moment, to be with him, to keep him safe. Desiree was sure that it had been Terry who chose what Chiron was going to wear that morning. "Hey Chiron," she would have said, handing him the t-shirt. "Why don't you wear your CSI t-shirt today?" All four parents watched TV crime shows and were fans of Dexter, the series about a forensic technician with a secret life as a vigilante serial killer. Later, Desiree heard that Terry had told a friend something she'd learned from an episode of the show. Leaving a body in water, A river or a lake, maybe, was the best way to hide it. Desiree and Tony were introduced to several detectives with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, including Captain Mike Schultz, who would be embedded with them for the next several days. They would have to remain in Kane's house except for when they were taken to be interviewed or to take a polygraph. The parents met Caroline Holmes, FBI, Sue Gates, MCSO, and Greg Vinning, Trout Fire and Rescue Squad. The detectives took everyone's cell phones to download their data. They asked for credit card information and email addresses. No more secrets, Tony remarked. He knew that ordinary, everyday life had to be sacrificed when a child was missing. Our lives are no longer private. They will know our dirty laundry, he told the others. That did not sit well with Terry. She was the only one who balked at giving over her phone and the order to lock down her Facebook page. For years, Desiree had been in the habit of unconsciously rolling her eyes at something Terry did or said. She started to do that now as Terry complained about being asked to give up some privacy in order to help find Chiron. They were told to compile a list of friends and acquaintances, relatives, babysitters, doctors, and anyone they had found suspicious. It was routine and gave detectives a place to start. They didn't know whether Chiron had been abducted by a stranger at school or by someone who was familiar to him, or if he had just wandered away. They needed a list of their spouse's friends too. Kane, a software engineer at Intel in Hillsboro in southwest Portland, didn't know many of Terry's friends, but he made a list of names of women who had attended the birthday party he gave her in March. Most were people she knew from the gym. Friends and family usually understand when their name appears on a list. They want to help, but it can create a problem. When 6-year-old John Benet Ramsey was found dead in her Boulder, Colorado house on Christmas Day, 1996, her parents pointed the finger at longtime friends and neighbors. Close friendships were shattered. 6 months before, Tony had collected DNA and fingerprints from Chiron and Quinn and locked them in his home safe. Parents can obtain an ID kit from the state police, and the kit is often available at school events. But this was something police officers did for their families. Desiree had been hesitant at the time. She had to explain to her sons why Tony was taking a cheek swab, hair sample, and fingerprints. It was an uncomfortable conversation to have with her boys. Tony didn't remind Desiree that they had Chiron's DNA at the house, but he asked a patrol officer in Medford to go into the safe and to bring the samples to Portland, along with their mail, bills, and more clothes. It looked like they would be in Portland for a while. The house was filling up. There were Kane, Terry, and Kira, nicknamed Kitty, and Desiree, Tony, and Quinn. Other family members and friends came and went. So did multiple police officers. Desiree noticed, as others did, that Kira acted angry at Terry. She avoided her mother and didn't go to her to be held. Instead, she went to Desiree and the others. Was Kira reacting to a stress in the house, or to something that had happened that day? If only she could speak about what she'd seen, Desiree thought. She had presumably went with Terry all morning in the school and in the truck. Terry had said so. One of the first things the detectives wanted to know was how the parents and step-parents had spent their day. The police quickly ruled out Desiree and Tony as having anything to do with Chiron's disappearance. It was easy to prove that they had been in Southern Oregon hours and hundreds of miles away when Chiron had disappeared. But all the parents prepared a timeline. Terry, well, she had trouble with hers. For the first time, Desiree and Tony heard the details from Kane and Terry about the day. Kane Kane and Chiron had had a moment to themselves in the morning. Kane told his son how proud he was that Chiron had worked hard on his science project. He promised they'd play games with their Wii home video game console together after school. Then Kane said, "I love you," and Chiron said, "I love you too, Dad." Kane spent the morning and early afternoon at Intel. He arrived home at about 2 p.m. Terry was on her laptop downstairs. There was a desktop computer upstairs where their bedroom was, but she spent most of her time on the laptop. At 3:15 p.m., Kane and Terry and Kira walked down the road to meet Chiron's bus. They watched several neighborhood children step off the bus, but there was no Chiron. Where was he? Kane asked the bus driver to phone the school. Maybe Chiron had gotten confused and was waiting at the school. The driver made the call and relayed the news to Kane. Chiron wasn't there. Kane, Terry, and Kira left quickly for the school. Desiree and Tony heard Terry describe her day. Terry had said she had taken a photo of Chiron at 8:45 a.m. and walked out of the school with Kira at 8:50. She said she parked in the truck in the school parking lot. Kane's house was northwest of the school. To the south were miles of suburban sprawl, including the towns of Beaverton and Hillsborough, both in Washington County, population 500,000 people. Terry told detectives she had stopped at 2 Fred Meyer's stores, one on Northwest Embry Drive in Hillsborough, about 5 miles south of the school, and one on Southwest Walker Road in Beaverton, a couple of miles southeast. She was looking for the cold medicine for Kira, who had an earache. Terry also stopped by the 24-hour fitness gym on Twin Oaks Drive in Beaverton. The gym played a weird role in all of their lives. It was ground zero for Kane's dating life. It was where Kane had first spotted Desiree. It was where he had met other women. He'd met Terry at a restaurant, but the gym was important to their story. Terry said she'd arrived home at 1 p.m., posted the photo of Chiron on Facebook, and spent her afternoon emailing or texting friends until Kane got home, and then they walked to the bus. Then they walked to meet the bus. There was time unaccounted for in Terry's timeline. She shrugged it off. Between 9:40 a.m. and her stop to the gym, she said she had been driving around trying to get Kira, who was fussy, to fall asleep. Kane and Terry arrived at the school at 3:56 p.m. The school then called 911. Police were dispatched at 3:59 p.m. and arrived within minutes. Police told the school secretary to make the emergency notifications and to call Chiron's mother. The secretary had called Desiree at 4:24 p.m. At 4:33 p.m., additional officers from the Portland Police Bureau and the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office arrived at both Skyline Elementary and at Kane's house. At 5:30 p.m., a message was sent by Portland Public Schools to the phones of families across the school district stating that Chiron Horman, a second grader at Skyline Elementary, had not arrived home. At 7 p.m., Multnomah County Sheriff's Detective Sergeant Lee Gosen altered Sergeant Travis Goldberg, the county's on-call coordinator and search and rescue efforts, of the need to begin a formal missing persons search for Chiron. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Mary Lindstrand and the Sheriff's Office spokesperson began to return calls to the media and arrange for them to come to the school between 7 p.m. and 7:45 p.m. Sheriff Dan Staton called the FBI to notify them of Chiron's disappearance. Although school staff and police had swept the school, trained searchers were summoned and arrived at the school at 8:09 p.m. At 8:15 p.m., Lieutenant Lindstrand arrived at the school, spoke with the media, and began emailing a photo of Chiron taken that morning to television stations and newspapers. At 8:25, the search and rescue coordinator, Deputy Mark Heron, arrived. At 9:48, Mountain Wave, an emergency communications and search and rescue group based in Gresham, arrived at the scene. At 10:40 p.m., police reported they had completed a search of the school, including all crawl spaces, storage areas, classrooms, and outbuildings. They had also searched the Horman house and property. There was a brief flurry when somebody pointed out that a man wearing a plaid shirt was in the background of the photograph of Chiron. He was quickly identified as a parent and cleared. Terry had some theories. There was the janitor, whom she found suspicious. Maybe Chiron had gone outside to play, or maybe to look for a tree frog to add to his science exhibit. Or maybe he had left to explore some horse barns a couple of miles away. Desiree knew this was ridiculous. Chiron was timid and quiet and would never leave a place he felt comfortable and safe. There were rules, and he wouldn't break one just to go out on an adventure. Terry, who said she'd seen Chiron enter his classroom, told different versions too. She said that when she left Chiron, he had been with a chaperone, leading the children around to see the various science projects. The school said there were no adults acting as chaperones. Later, a parent involved with the PTA explained that there were parent-led groups of the students walking between the classrooms to see science exhibits. She led the group made up of Chiron's classmates. He was not in it. At the house, detectives outfitted Kane with the wire to record the conversations of the groups in the house. None of the other parents knew. Tony knew the potential for pitfalls when investigators align themselves quickly with family member, as the MCSO did with Kane. It means they've decided where their focus should be. Sometimes it inhibits the investigation of all family members as well as persons outside of the family. One practical reason police befriended Kane was that he, as the owner of the home, could agree to court orders, to wearing a wire, and to putting a tracking device on his truck, which they did. The first story in the Oregonian, the city's only daily newspaper, was posted on its website at 10:22 p.m. It was headlined, "Officers Looking for Second Grader Missing in Northwest Portland." It was accompanied by a photo of Chiron, his head cocked a little to the right, smiling and wearing a white t-shirt with a Nike in orange-green letters. His school photo for 2000 and 2010. The story was written by Kate Mather. The Multnomah County Sheriff's Office is leading the search for a missing second-grade boy last seen at his Portland school mid-morning Friday. 7-year-old Chiron Horman was attending a science fair at Skyline Elementary in Northwest Portland, according to Matt Shelby, spokesperson for the Portland Public Schools. He was last seen at about 9 a.m. Chiron, who was with his stepmother at the fair that morning, never checked back in with his teacher afterward, Shelby said. The stepmother notified Skyline about 4 p.m. when he didn't come home from school on the bus. Because Chiron had not been seen for several hours, Shelby said. School officials were immediately concerned. Portland police were notified shortly after that, Shelby said. An automated phone message was sent to Skyline parents at about 5:30 p.m. Friday. Parents and students at other schools in the district also received that message, Shelby said. Portland police handed the case over to the sheriff's office, said Detective Mary Wheat, a police spokesperson. The school at 11536 Northwest Skyline Boulevard is in Multnomah County. Lieutenant Mary Lindstrand, a sheriff's spokeswoman, said that the agency would have searchers out as long as needed. At 9:45 p.m., Lindstrand said that she had more than 20 people, including detectives and 2 K-9 units, looking for Chiron in the broad area around the school. She requested that people stay away from the area to let searchers do their work. Portland and Gresham police were assisting with the search, and the FBI was called, Lindstrand said. The boy lives with his father and stepmother. Lindstrand said his mother, who lives out of area, was on her way here. Anyone with information regarding Chiron's whereabouts is asked to call a tip line at 503-261-2847. Desiree wanted to talk to Kane alone. She pulled him into Chiron's room. Being in her son's room broke her heart. He had slept in that bed the night before. There was a pile of unfolded laundry tossed on it. He had read the books on the shelves and had held the stuffed animals. He loved his miniature cars, which were usually scattered across the floor. She asked the same question she had asked from Terry a few hours earlier. What the hell's going on? Desiree reminded Kane that she was not just any mom. She was married to a detective. And from personal experience, she knew that there was evil in the world. She had learned that when she was young. This doesn't happen to random children, she told him. Why Chiron? Why did this come to your front door? What is going on in this house? This happened on your watch. Then she repeated her question. What the hell is going on? It was her new go-to retort. It summed up the frustration and fear she felt. It was a question with broad implications. It suggested a lot of her questions. What is going on in your marriage, your house, your relationship with your son, your relationship with your wife? How did you lose my child? Kane didn't answer her questions, but he did apologize for a long ago past. He said he was sorry that he had been a bad husband and had cheated on her. Yes, this had happened on his watch. He understood why she was mad. Desiree looked around the room as they talked. She picked out a shirt in the pile of laundry and grasped it as she talked to Kane. On the shelf were Chiron's